Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning. Look, I thought I would start this morning by sharing an experience that I had earlier this year. So it goes back, it was the 3rd of March, and I was heading out to Auckland Airport. And you know that feeling you get when you're going to welcome, some arriving visitors, and there's so much excitement, particularly post-pandemic. People either coming back for something they know or new travellers coming to experience Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it was actually a really special moment because I was heading to the Novotel where I was meeting with industry, some officials, and we were welcoming back the very first ADS tour group from China. And I have to say, 61 Chinese visitors came into the room, and there was so much excitement. You could feel how energised they were about travelling again. You could feel how excited they were to be back. And actually they were the lucky ones because that first tour sold out in under a minute. And they put another 20 seats on, and it sold out in seconds. And I think there's a couple of reasons I say that. I tell you this story is one, we work in tourism, we work in hospitality, we work in accommodation because it is an exciting industry, and the excitement is it's about people, and it's actually about really special moments like that. And the second thing is it gave me so much optimism about the Chinese visitor and the return of the Chinese traveller. So as Adrian said, my name's Angela Blair. I'm the GM International for Tourism New Zealand. What that means is I look after all of our offshore teams, and we look at what are we doing to drive and also shape the demand for travellers to New Zealand. And actually at Tourism New Zealand, our purpose is a little bit broader than that. So our purpose is to enrich Aotearoa and all those who visit. And what that really means, and particularly for those in the room and the industry, is we are looking at how can we create an experience that's really enriching for our visitors, but we're also saying how do we do it in a way that works for industry, that works for New Zealand. And we work very closely to see, whether that's how they travel, where they travel, when they travel. So I'm going to spend about 10 or so minutes just chatting to you about what does a Chinese traveller look like, what did they look like pre-COVID, what are we seeing? It is very early days, I would say. What are we seeing? What are we expecting? Naomi Bolton from trip.com is going to talk a little bit about what she's seeing in more detail. And then at the end, I will share a little bit about what we're doing this year and into the future. So, you'll all probably know that China was our second largest market, so our second largest source market. They're really important to us, 390,000 visitors in 2019. That made up a total of about 11% of our overall arrivals. But for us, when we look at our portfolio and all the different markets that we invite to come and visit, and China plays a part more than just the pure numbers. So they are among our highest spenders, so about 15% of our overall income comes from the Chinese visitor, or our spend. But more importantly, it's how they travel. So 67% of our Chinese visitors come off peak. And that's really important as we move into this longer rebuild, is how can we make sure that we extend our peak, that we work into those kind of shoulder seasons, that we continue to drive that, and particularly from a market that's already predisposed to that. And it is really important when I talk about predisposed, because we're not in the business of actually changing how visitors travel, more just tapping into, particularly from our point of view, what are the right points for us to intervene. So a little bit more about the past visitor profile. It's dominated by free independent traveller. I'll try and explain all our acronyms as we go through, and ADS group travellers. So the free independent traveller made up the largest group at 39%. And if we think about what's the profile of the free independent traveller, I'll talk a little bit later about what our target market is. But the people who are finding New Zealand appealing and actively considering New Zealand from China are relatively young, and maybe I've just crossed a border because 80% of them were under 40. Those who are in that free independent traveller group, 95% of them are tertiary educated. I should note that from our point of view, we don't target all of China. We look at 8 of the biggest cities and regions, so it's probably a little bit skewed by that. But they're very upwardly mobile. They've got a growing middle class. This is who's coming through as our free independent travellers. The second big group is ADS, which is the Approved Destination Status Travel. This is where the China government has made an agreement with other governments that we are approved to have quality travel groups come to New Zealand. And there's regulations around the quality of accommodation that they take and also the number of activities that they partake in. And I'll talk a little bit more about where we sit in that ADS and the advantages we have. We also then have a mix of VFR, some business, which, as we've talked about in lots of markets, we see that blurring of our business should also be considered our leisure travellers and education. So if we now look at what's changing, I would say that this graph that shows travel purpose is a moment in time. What we can see as TNZ, because we've gone through all the other markets that have opened up, is this is not unusual for what we see when a market opens up. VFR comes back very strong. We'll often see business, early things like education come back as a higher mix, and leisure takes a little bit longer. We're already starting to see these balance back out, so we wouldn't be taking anything until we're a good sort of 6 months in to see what's happening. What we can say is from seeing what's happened with Australia, what we've seen with our Northern American markets, is for them, most of the patterns we saw pre-COVID have normalised. So we've gone back to the same mix of business, leisure, VFR. Because we're seeing this really odd mix of visitors, you'll also be probably seeing odd, kind of unusual activity in terms of things like length of stay, booking window, booking channel. Again, for our other markets, we've actually seen most of those behaviours normalise. So length of stay comes back down when you have leisure go up, and also once you've had those first travellers. You know what it's like, you've got pent-up demand, you spend a little bit longer, you might have extended leave from being in a lockdown. But we're seeing length of stay go back. We're seeing value hold up higher than volume for our other markets, so we would anticipate that these are the sort of things that we would be able to talk to you about in another 6 months. And then the other thing about what's changing is around our travel preference. So this is specifically if someone's thinking, which countries do I want to go to? What are the preference drivers that are really important for them? Now, again, they fluctuated during the pandemic, but they are gradually returning to pre-pandemic state. So we see that escapism and an opportunity to experience local culture, food and wine in any season are emerging as strong drivers. If we look at the 2021 rank, we would expect to see the differences. That was right in the middle of lockdown. That's when people are very much in a dreaming phase. As we came closer to opening, they move into sort of more rational drivers, thinking about more practical considerations. So we see affordability to fly increases, practicality of what to see and how easy is it going to be to travel around and see those things. One thing I would say, though, that we continue to see an increase in, it started pre-pandemic and has continued, is an importance around being culturally comfortable. And anecdotally, this is very, very strong for our Chinese traveller. So there is a nervousness from this market about how they will be perceived and the welcome they will get, not just in our country, but wherever they travel. And it's really important to them, and it's something that has always been incredibly strong in New Zealand, and it's operators such as yourself that offer this, that they always received a really warm welcome. It's something that they're thinking about really carefully. And the other one is actually the importance of engaging with local culture, and we see that actually increasing across all of our markets. So if we move to the present, Chinese travellers undoubtedly, and this is Skift Research looking globally at all outbound, they are absolutely ready to go. So they opened their borders, they removed quarantine on the 8th of January. There were still some barriers, so that there were still exit interviews they had to go through. There were various steps that were still there. Those have all gone now. They also opened up ADS travel from the 6th of February. So we were one of the first 20 countries to make it back on that ADS travel list, and there's a few reasons why that's really important. So notably, that's now at 70. Australia, the US and Canada are still not on that list to be able to travel in group travel. And one of the things that it does is not only does it obviously allow us to have ADS group travel, it sends a really clear signal to the Chinese visitor that their government feels very comfortable with New Zealand as a place to visit. So it's fantastic for us to be holding that ADS inclusion. In terms of timing, what you'll see is the first peak that we would expect to see is around Golden Week, both domestically and international, high preference for travel in that time period. And then for international, the next highest peak will be around the Chinese New Year. So sorry, this is probably my most complicated chart. But if we're talking about, how many Chinese travellers want to travel globally, this talks just to New Zealand. So at Tourism New Zealand, we talk about something called the active considerer. And I'll explain a little bit about what we consider active considerer. So we start with a pool of 100 million, that's who we're targeting within those cities. And we say, do you find New Zealand appealing? That's great, that's at 77%. And then are you intending to travel in the next 3 years? And then are we in your top preference, which we say is the top 5? And then do you have the funds available to be able to have a quality trip through our country? And it's about the equivalent of $3,000, excluding airfares. And when we ask all those questions, we end up at 46 million Chinese who have said yes to all of those things, which is a fantastic number and has grown considerably even since we opened our borders and started being realistically ready to receive them. Of this, probably of all our markets, we have 2 out of 3 of these active considerers say New Zealand is their top preference. So we feel very confident that there's high appeal. The second chart shows you where they are in their thinking. We still have a lot who are just dreaming about it. We move into planning. Even in booking, we're talking about 13.6 million Chinese. Now, I do need to clarify, booking is a mindset. It doesn't mean they're about to book their ticket. It means that they're confident and comfortable. If you look at the things like probably affordability, capacity of airlines, leave, all those things, if they all lined up, yes, they would be ready to book tomorrow. So the next thing we have to ask ourselves is, if they're ready to book, can they get here? And again, this is really good news for us. And I would say it's the incredible work that our airlines, our aviation partners, and particularly our airports did during COVID to keep really strong relationships with China and airlines flying. So 50% is the total outbound capacity for China at the moment. New Zealand's well above that. If we look at the next 3 months, we have, in terms of return, we have 83% return of airlines. We have 77% return in capacity. And then we have 67% return in city pairs. And what that means is, city to city, of all the cities around the world, Auckland has actually recovered faster than any other city in terms of connections back into the Chinese market. So we're well placed to be receiving our Chinese visitors. So the final thing I want to touch on, so if we think about it and we know there's high appeal, we know there's high preference, we know we've got some capacity for them to be coming, do we line up with what they're really looking for? And are we going to be able to deliver on what they want? And the good news is, this is actually a mood board that our active considerers in China pulled together from images that we showed them. And it shows how well aligned we are with what they're thinking. So we know that Chinese consumers want to visit New Zealand to experience our natural landscapes, our scenery, to get in touch with nature. We know that they find our destination relaxing and clean and unpolluted, which are very important drivers for them. They have a strong desire to visit our natural attractions. And the one image that I'm quite surprised is missing from that is they have a really high interest in actually experiencing our local food and wine. The areas where we're seeing probably change or growth over that COVID period for the Chinese is there's a growing interest in outdoor experiential products. And what that means is things like cycling, hiking, camping, and also skiing. So if we look at skiing alone, there's been a 4% increase last year in the skiing population. It's now, again, every time we talk about China and we look at these numbers and I compare them to the other markets, now that ski market is 20 million. So we have a lot of product that suits what they're looking for. So we do feel like we're in a very good position to be able to answer to their requirements. So look, just before I pass over to Naomi, I'll just chat through the top planning sources, and she'll obviously spend more time. But you can see about a quarter of all of those planning trips are using either OTAs or social media. So looking at things like C-Trip. And on social media, the largest one being Red. For us, we actually stayed, we had our team in market continue to drive awareness for New Zealand over the COVID period, and spent quite a lot of time actually building up, and I'll talk at the end, some of the work we're doing on these channels, such as Red and such as Doyen. It's also, you'll probably be aware that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Tourism are right now up in China, and you'll be pleased to know that part of their visit does include a trip to both C-Trip and to Red to talk about how we work together as countries. So look, I will leave that here at the moment. After Naomi, I'll come back and just let you know a little bit about what we're going to be doing in the next year and therefore how you can engage.
Thank you, Angela. That was fantastic. And this is indeed a fantastic segue because those two OTAs mentioned there by Skift are brands of Trip.com groups. So this causes a lot of confusion. Trip.com group is C-Trip. We were renamed in 2019 from C-Trip to Trip.com Group, and that encompasses these brands. So C-Trip's been around since 1999. I'm sure we'll have some big 25th birthday parties next year. And the Trip.com brand came around in about 2017, and that represents something like 40 different points of sale around the world now in 24 languages. Cunard's China's number 2 OTA, and we bought them in 2015, so we've now got those sort of top 2 OTAs. Skyscanner you'll probably have heard of as well, so this is a meta engine that started off in flights and now does hotels as well. And Trip.biz you might not have heard of, so this is our corporate travel management company. Again, when we're talking about China, these are big numbers. When we talk about corporate travel in China, this is one of the largest CTMs. 36 million travellers they look after, and 14,000 enterprises, including 300 of the Fortune 500 companies. So this is large amounts of numbers. It's not something I'll have spoken to many of you in the room about, because here in New Zealand we're pretty new to bringing back sort of the B2B stuff through the OTAs, so look out for that in our conversations coming up. Another brand that's not on there, because I know that India was mentioned a few times over the last day or so, Make My Trip is India's number 1 OTA, and that is a company we have a majority shareholding in. Now, the size of the market in China is obviously huge, and between all of these brands, something like 3/4 of travel bookings in China are made on one of our brands. So it's no really big surprise that the external data and reporting tends to refer to some of our statistics and trends. So yes, I look after New Zealand with one other colleague here in New Zealand. We're still pretty small here. I joined in 2021 in the middle of the lockdown in September. And so for well over a year, I've had pretty much no data to work with. And so it's been pretty exciting this year, since the borders reopened, to have some lovely numbers. And for me, what this has been really interesting to watch is how closely aligned the recovery's been with that return of the air capacity. So as you saw in Angela's slide, I don't know if you took a photo of that one, that Q1 piece saw some pretty steady recovery, gradual steady recovery throughout Q1. And as it hit 50% recovered, so that capacity of the direct connectivity hit 50% in April, around week 15, we hit 100% recovered in terms of room nights. There's been a little bit of up and downy since, so those public holiday periods are, of course, when the Chinese often travel. They don't get a lot of annual leave, but they didn't line up exactly compared to 2019, so it's sort of up and down a little bit. But you'll see the overall trend there has been rising in line with the recovery of the air connectivity, which, as Angela mentioned, is now sitting at 76%, and still recovering. And as compared to Australia, I know there's been a bit of speculation around, where is the Chinese traveller? In Australia, they're particularly finding it's not back yet. They're only just hitting that 50% mark recovered now, so Angela's slide showed that too. Now, you might be wondering if, how are we 100% recovered when, as Angela talks to, we're about 39% recovered in terms of those overall arrivals from the China market. And that's mainly because of the group/FIT split she touched on as well. So we are predominantly FIT when we're talking about the Trip.com brands. As I mentioned, we're not really pushing the B2B piece yet here. But we do also have 5,000 bricks and mortar travel stores in China, so there was scope to work with us on that B2B piece as well. And something else that's been talked about, of course, in the initial slides from Angela was the strong travel spend from the Chinese traveller. There has been, as mentioned yesterday, a recovery in ADR. That RevPAR growth has been driven by the ADR growth across the board. But what's been interesting is when I split that out by brand, the C-trip rate is nearly $60 more year to date. And there's a few reasons for that. Some of that is the preference for 4- and 5-star hotels. And there is some of that premiumization that was talked about yesterday as well. And there is a strong preference to book breakfast inclusive rates. I drilled down on this, and C-trip customers are actually twice as likely to book a breakfast inclusive rate compared to a Trip.com customer. So literally 25% of C-trip bookings had breakfast included. So it's really, really important to have those breakfast rates loaded and available to that market. Now, another thing that's led to this sort of somewhat higher ADR for C-trip is that lead time has been shorter as the initial wave of travel has been coming back, and that sort of uncertainty has led to some really short lead times. In April, this is pretty unprecedented for C-trip. 50% of bookings were made within a week of arrival, which is really, really short for a long-haul traveller. That is starting to normalise now. As Angela mentioned, once you get past that initial wave, you do find some normalisation, and you'll see here in May, that light blue line on the far right here, that 61-day plus bucket has now taken back its usual spot is higher, as that sort of uncertainty is starting to pass and people are booking with more certainty out into the future. Something else that's sort of affecting all of these booking behaviours is the changing traveller demographics. It has been spoken about again over the last couple of days about this Gen Z and the millennials driving the recovery. Gen Z is seeing the biggest sort of growth piece for us at Trip. And there are really quite different drivers for consumption. So we've talked about, I can't remember whether it was TripAdvisor or Google mentioned yesterday, about that sort of decision-making around spend and discretionary spend, but all spend really. And so we looked at how different generations make those decisions. Now, Gen Z and Gen Y have almost opposing drivers on that front. So that Generation Z has been driving the growth and the recovery because they're all about pleasure and they're all about those social connections, and they spend a lot of time on social media, and generating content for their pretty pictures on their socials is quite a driver for travel. There's also an opportunity, I think, here for you guys to really attract these generations, since there are opposing situations going on here. Whatever the USP for your property is, you're probably going to be appealing to one of those particular aspects. The technology piece overlaps for both of those generations. Of course, millennials have grown up with the trendy technologies and the ChatGPTs, etc. We do have a Trip Gen, I think it's called, is the chatbot on our app. And the other thing that you do need to sort of bear in mind as well is that these digitally savvy travellers really expecting to be able to do quite a lot without really talking to a person at the property, and I'll touch on that again in a minute. There is another reason that this is important, and that is driving the business leisure situation as well. So that's been talked about a little bit too. But what I want to mention here is that the Gen Zs are combining leisure and business travel almost the other way around to what we were talking about, where business travellers are maybe extending their stay, tacking on some leisure to their business trips. It's sort of the flip side for the Gen Zs, because they can go on holiday but still work whilst they're away, so they're actually spending longer on holiday than they might have done before. They're also quite spontaneous and, driving that FIT recovery and growth as well. And they're a bit more adventurous around what sort of accommodation they stay in. So I don't know if you've read this particular report from McKinsey, the Outlook for China Tourism. It was released in April. There's a lot of great information there. Who gets my monthly update email? I would have sent a link out to that, I think, in that one last month. There is a lot of interesting questions that they asked their survey set, and I thought this one would be interesting to compare what's happening here in New Zealand. And while we are seeing a little bit of that decrease in the international chain brands, because this demographic is driving a bit more adventurousness from the traveller, what I'm not seeing as much as this increase in preference for independent accommodation. That's because it was already pretty strong pre-COVID here. And also don't forget that this is also talking about domestic travel on the left. So this is people who've travelled quite a long way. Travellers are pretty cautious about where they stay. There's that confidence gap that was talked about yesterday. And so a bit of branding of some sort, so a local chain brand, is still appealing slightly more than the independent situation. Having said that, independent's still the biggest sit there than local chain, but that growth is really coming up in those local chain properties. Another report that's really worth reading is the Dragon Trail research. This was the Chinese Traveller Sentiment Report, again released in April, and that was really comprehensive again around the intention to travel. So there's a lot of pent-up demand, as Angela alluded to. But then once they are making those decisions, what does that path to purchase look like for the Chinese traveller? So they were asked, when choosing a hotel, which of the following are important to you? Now, I know there's a couple of hotel developers in the room, but unless you are one, then the location of your property is not something you can do much about. So the next most important one here is the Chinese-speaking staff. Now, this stood out to me in two different ways. Firstly, yes, it's important still, right? There's quite a difference in the language, but it's also less important than it used to be. So, there's about half of this market that don't actually care whether they can speak Chinese with someone at your property, partly because technology's improved that, partly because the younger generation does tend to speak English. So, yeah, it's not game over if you don't have a Chinese-speaking staff member. It's as important to have a kettle in your room, and I'm betting most of you have got that. Free Wi-Fi, of course, is pretty standard now. So the next one I want to call out here is the breakfast piece. So that talks again to that stat I mentioned before. 45% of travellers like to find a rate that includes breakfast. That's partly the power of free that was talked about yesterday as well, but it's also about budgeting. They want to be able to spend more of their travel budget on the activities and going and seeing the local areas and spending a lot more on dinner. And that's a lot more important than the Chinese breakfast specifically being available. So again, just make sure you've got that breakfast loaded. And so how do you tell your these customers that you offer those things? Of course, here comes my sales pitch. If you're not working with C-Trip and Trip, then that's probably a good start. But as Malcolm said, everybody's a distribution platform these days. So if you aren't listed, you're probably on there. But what you're not probably doing is optimizing your content. And that's obviously come up a lot the last couple of days, is that content is so important to conversion. These were set before we saw the data on the previous slide, so it's reassuring there's a lot of alignment here. If you can tick all these boxes in the extranet, then you automatically get assigned a Chinese-friendly hotel tag, and that is a popular filter on the desktop site and the apps. What didn't come up on the previous slide, there's two things actually that I thought was surprising that weren't on there. Chinese payment methods is sort of one of those things that you don't know isn't going to be available to you when you go somewhere until it becomes a problem and you can't buy a drink for someone. My colleague recently went to China from Australia, and she tried to buy some drinks for her colleagues, for our colleagues over there, and they don't take Visa or MasterCard. So, it's a bit of a problem when they get to your hotel. They've probably prepaid. They will have used Ctrip to pay for their booking before they get to you. But if they can't then go to the bar and use UnionPay or Alipay or WeChat Pay, it's a bit of a problem for their incremental spend. So have a chat with the likes of Paymark downstairs about whether your UnionPay thing is turned on. There is what we call this type of content is static content. So this is the sort of information that consumers use to make the decisions about where they're going to stay. And sorry, Adrian, the billboard effect does not work in China. They're not going to go and look at your own website because it's probably not localised in a way they're going to find the information they're looking for. So they'll just go to the next listing or the next property that comes up in the filters they're looking for to make that decision. The social proof piece is also really important. So review scores over 80%, which is 4 out of 5 on Trip. So once this static content's all in line, are you actually visible to the audiences? And I say static, really you kind of need this video stuff going on. So the 10th China Internet Audio-Visual Conference happened in Tianjin last March, and they released a report showing that there's over 1 billion AV users in China now. And who's on WeChat? Everyone's on WeChat, right? It's been overtaken by all of these other social media platforms that are about video. Something like 168 minutes per day is the average user watch of short video content on apps like Douyin. So from, if you took a picture of Angela's last slide, 20% of that social media piece was Douyin, and one that is growing fast was 10% on that pie chart, and that's Kuaishou. So those are both really specifically video platforms, and so they're very used to seeing video to make their decisions. What you can't see from these little shots on the left is that almost half of that's moving. It's all moving content. So static content is important for the tick boxes and the filters, but having really engaging storytelling type content is very important for that decision-making process. Again, humongous numbers when we're talking about China. And the Ctrip app downloads is something like 5 billion. It's obviously more than one per person in some cases. But what we do, like all the other OTAs, is spend a lot of money on marketing in the places that the customers are looking and spending time. So red was that highest piece of the pie for the social media situation, so we spend a lot of money marketing on there, as well as we've got a very well used WeChat mini app and Alipay mini app, mini program they're called, and live streaming came up as well. So I've probably approached a few of you about a live stream situation that we were running on Ctrip. During the pandemic, they started doing live streaming as a way to improve cash flow, and it was really clever because no one could travel, but it kept them dreaming. So what they were doing was pre-selling rooms for hotels around the world, and it's absolutely refundable to the customer. So there's no risk to the customer. They could buy this room night as in the form of a voucher for redemption at the point at which they could travel. If the travel window passed before they managed to use it, we automatically refunded them. So there was no risk to the guest. And there was no risk to the hotel either, because, of course, that's the money we've collected and we give back to them. Once they have locked in their room and redeemed that voucher, then it becomes non-refundable, non-changeable to the hotel. So it's sort of a win-win. And then we had cash flow through a period that there was literally outbound travel. So it was pretty clever, but it's been really, really popular. And as a trusted brand, Ctrip's live stream has sort of grown in popularity, and live streaming overtook WeChat as well. So it's now the second highest sort of audience for that consumption base online. So really, really different types of marketing that are really kind of hard to target without being, really specifically focused on this market. So, are you pulling the right levers once you are visible to that market? I know discounting's been touted as a bit of a dirty word yesterday. And for me, I'd say it's relative, right? If your price point is so low that you can't pull levers and target exactly what you need, you probably need to adjust your strategy a little bit there, because you can be really specific with those levers. You can target the geo, like Adrian sort of mentioned, he's been finding problematic. Like Kelly said, this is an opportunity to really target what it is that you're trying to achieve. So you can target Chinese travellers exclusively through geo-targeting, and a lot of the OTAs offer this, but you can be super specific to the room type you would like them to book, or the length of stay that you expect them to want, or the number of travellers. So as mentioned, there's a lot more pleasure, so people are bringing their families more than they might have done if they're here on business. So those family rooms are actually really, really popular now as well. And you're not necessarily having to offer the lowest price. So part of that McKinsey study found that Chinese travellers don't simply seek out the lowest prices, they just want a really good deal or feeling like they've got good value for money, as do we all, right? We want to feel like we've got the best value for money. There's that confidence gap because discretionary spend is a bit tight these days. You need to feel like you're getting a good deal when you're making any spending decision these days. So just being able to pull the right levers is very specific to your property, to where you are, to when you need it, and just working with the people who know the market. As Kelly says, you just need to leverage all the information that you've got available to you. All of the OTAs have got fantastic data in the background there in their analytics pieces. So just before I hand back to Angela, I'd like to give you some three takeaways. So the 3 C's, those customer needs, making sure that you're offering what the customer needs. The content should be rich and really giving the information they need to make those decisions. And the third C is C-trip, because otherwise lever doesn't start with C. So those C-trip targeted specific levers. And if you don't get my monthly update, look me up on LinkedIn and sign up. Thanks, Angela.
Look, I thought I'd just finish by telling you a little bit about what we're doing as Tourism New Zealand into the next year. So for us, FY24, which starts on the 1st of July. So for us, when we look at our overall portfolio of markets, it's really important, like I said, I touched on very briefly, the role that each market plays. And the future for us is very much around shaping that visitor arrival from China. So through our intervention as Tourism New Zealand, we seek to shape who arrives, when they come, and what they do. So a future visitor mix that would be ideal, that would be high quality and have a positive impact for us all, would include those free independent travellers. So we know that they engage deeply, they have very high NPS scores when they do travel. We'd like to look at how we build up those smaller bespoke tour groups that answer to what I mentioned previously. So whether it's cycling, we're getting more intergenerational family groups, which we've always sort of had from India, but that's coming through a little bit more from China as well. Whether it's food and beverage or adventure. So really looking at what are some of those bespoke groups we can bring in. And then the third is those high quality ADS groups. Seasonality I have talked to, so 67% travel in off-peak. We know and we've seen the numbers that demand over summer and Chinese New Year, it will be there, travel will happen. So from a TNZ point of view, we're going to direct more of our content, more of our campaign timing. The joint ventures that we do will be around that off-peak travel, so March through to November. And then the last piece is around regions. So at the moment, our Chinese visitors travel to 3 regions on average. We'd love to lift that to 4 regions. So we continue to promote a mixed itinerary which has the well-known regions and some of the lesser-known regions. Those experiential small group tours tend to do a little bit more of that. And the other opportunity we have is because we have ADS status and Australia doesn't, we have itineraries that are mono destination. So we no longer are in those groups like fighting to get our fair share of days when someone's looking at both of us. And I had an example just today when one of our agency team, who's UK, said she was really upset because her dad was travelling down, and she said, he should know I'm living here in New Zealand, I'm doing work with you guys. He's spending 8 weeks in Australia and 3 weeks in New Zealand. And we tend to sort of get that. So there's a massive opportunity when we can get mono destination, that we can actually show an itinerary. And we do know that when they come down and they do a single destination, they spend more time. They understand there is so much to see here just in New Zealand. So those are the areas that we're looking at in terms of shaping visitor arrivals. And just really quickly, some of the activity we're doing. I would have to say our team in China they are one of the most innovative marketing teams that I've had the privilege to work with. The channels, obviously, that they use are quite different to over here. So they're on WeChat mini programs, WeChat, Red, Douyin, Baidu, Ctrip, Ma Feng Wo. And they've spent a lot of time actually while we were shut down really building these up. China actually had a virtual influencer come down whilst we were closed. It was incredible. They had this full sensorial campaign where we had people uploading video of playing the piano and playing the violin, which was actually music that they'd written that evoked the feeling of our lakes and mountains. And it's incredible some of the work they're doing. We also work with our airlines on conversion campaigns. We work around PR and earned opportunities, and we recently got some great coverage around the FIFA Women's World Cup, with it being a month out. And we work with media influencers, bringing them down, and we saw that was sort of fourth behind the OTAs and some of these channels. On the trade side, we use very heavily WeChat mini programs and WeChat. We have an event, KiwiLink, in November up in Shanghai, bringing back face-to-face. And we do trade conversion campaigns with some of our traditional travel agents, CYTS and U-Tour, as well as Ctrip, Zuzushura, and other partners such as that. We've done a lot of live streaming, so during COVID we had 58 episodes of live streams, as Naomi said, really just keeping up that awareness and that excitement and that interest, so people were thinking about us when the borders reopened, and we'll continue to do that as a way of keeping our travel trade up to date. And then we have incentive for mills where we get to bring down our product managers and travel trade. So, look, in summary, we feel really positive about the China market. So we know, 42 million active considerers, 13 million in that booking phase. We feel there's great appeal, there's great preference. The connectivity is all looking very positive, and we believe that will continue to grow. We have the right product. I would say it is very competitive out there. We're definitely finding that as all the markets open back up. So we do need to continue to look at where we focus our efforts. And then I would just say, as an industry, we need to all work together to make sure that we do offer that incredibly warm welcome that we're so well known for. And then we'll have these first Chinese travellers going back and continuing to talk. And I've already seen some of the live streaming that they share from when they're here. And it's so powerful in terms of, that first experience back in our market. So,
thank you. Does anyone have any questions at all? Right up the back. You have time for about a couple of minutes for questions? Yep. Hang on. We've got one right up the back. Okay. Who was it? No. It was you, Troy. Yeah, Troy. Yep.
Just a quick question. Is there any update regarding the visa waiver status for China and also in India? Because I think they still have to apply for the visa, don't they, at this stage?
Is this live? Yes. So we're not having too many issues with the China visa. They are coming through very rapidly. We did have an initially when China opened up, our estimate was about 30% of Chinese didn't have passports. So the first piece was they needed to have passport issuance happening. And the China visas are coming through within a couple of weeks. We're not getting a lot of noise around the visas from our market. We were previously for India. They're all down to an average of just under 3 weeks. So at the moment, visas are looking a lot better than we initially opened up. And obviously, all departments, immigration needed to scale up, and it happened quite rapidly. So we're feeling very confident that the moves that immigration have made are making a big difference for those markets.
Thank you. Other question up here? Yep. Women.
Hello, Wim Rupert here from Horworth. You mentioned 390,000 visitors in 2019. What's your best estimate when we get back to those numbers of visitor arrivals from China?
What he's not telling you is that he made that estimate himself yesterday.
I did?
So
what is your
look,
estimate?
I would say from what we're seeing, we're slightly more optimistic than you might be. But there are a lot of economic factors around that globally, of course.
Yeah, we don't, at Tourism New Zealand, we're not on the business of forecasting numbers, so I don't have a number that I can give you to say where we're at. We have seen every market recover differently, and also up and down. We had Singapore back at 100% in November, come back down. What I would say is it tends to track closely to airline capacity. So we see a very strong growth out of North America, and no surprises, very strong growth in capacity. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a number I can give you. I can't tell you when we anticipate being back at 390.
Anyone else who have any questions at all? No? All right, please thank Naomi and Angela. That was fantastic. Thank you.